Oh, now it doesn't sound so good.
Before the Rolling Stones had been formed, you know, Mick Jagger would turn up and say, "Oh, can I sit in?" So there's actually a very famous photo of the Alexis Corner Blues Incorporated with Mick Jagger singing in a club before the Stones.
You played some fucking notes on my solo, jumped off the kit, punched your dad in the face. Your dad went down and he pulled a knife at him, always with the knife.
Always with the knife. Eric was playing with John Mayall, and at the end of the show, Ginger asked Eric, "Would you like to put a band together?" And Eric said, "Yeah, but I'd like to have Jack on bass." Young kids in the 60s coming up and inventing that genre that we're now kind of standing on the shoulder of what they did.
He was going to form a band with Hendrix. Malcolm, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's wonderful to have you. I was just thinking today, I think we've known each other since 2013 when we were working on your dad's album, Silver Rails.
Yeah, like 10, 11 years now, yeah.
I mean, that's a long time, man.
It's a long time.
And I was just, you know, today it'd be great if we could talk a little bit about your dad and, you know, the whole, your dad's solo career and Cream and the whole evolution of the start, the middle and the end, and then also your own music and where you're going in your life and the challenges of being, you know, the son of somebody very famous. But I mean, just going back to the very beginning of your dad's career. So, I mean, I was doing a lot of research this morning and it's just huge. I mean, there's so much to go through. It's like a bit overwhelming nearly. But so he started out, I think, with, wasn't it Alexis Corner's band, Blues Incorporated?
Yeah, I mean, really, actually what he did was he was from Glasgow and, you know, working class background, but ended up going to the Royal Scottish Academy of Music, but kind of didn't really get on in that world for whatever reason, and so left early and ended up going to an Italian American Air Force base in Italy with a jazz band, I believe, and like spending 6 months or something. I think something happened with a girl over there, like he might have got somebody pregnant or something went down and he kind of got chased out of Italy quite early on. He was like 17 or something.
As you do.
Yeah. And then sort of went back to Scotland with his tail between his legs and then kind of came down to the south of England. I believe he was playing with, I think it's Jim McHarg's something, like a jazz band. And he went to the Cambridge May Ball, which is like, you know, lots of bands playing across Cambridge, the university and everything. And he walked past somewhere and down in a basement, he heard this incredible jazz music being played. And he went down and it was Ginger Baker and Dick Hextall-Smith, the sax player. And he sort of, like this little cocky Scottish kid, I want to sit in, you know. And so they said, all right. So he went and got his bass, his double bass, came back and played, sat in, and they sort of threw the hardest possible, fastest tempo jazz piece, and he kind of nailed it and blew them all away. And then left. And apparently Dick Hextall-Smith and Ginger kind of searched for him in London, found him sleeping on someone's sofa, and then just subsequent to that kind of started bringing him into the London jazz world, which kind of also contained the beginnings of the blues scene, or what was called then R&B, I guess. And, you know, that was like 1960, 61. And then through that, the Alexis Corner Blues Incorporated, he joined that with Charlie Watts was the original drummer. And then when Charlie left, and, you know, when they would do these gigs at the Ealing Club and the Marquee very early on, and before the Rolling Stones had been formed, you know, Mick Jagger would turn up and say, "Oh, can I sit in?" So there's actually a very famous photo of the Alexis Corner Blues Incorporated with Mick Jagger singing in a club before the Stones. And then when the Stones were formed and Charlie left to join the Stones, and Charlie had his own issues with that because I think he wanted to become an architect and, you know, he wanted to have a proper job. But he sort of joined this band. He had a few different options. He ended up going, I'll go with these guys. And then the rest is history. But Charlie recommended Ginger to become the drummer. Wow. So, yeah. And then the rest is history. You know, Alexis Corner, subsequent to that, Graham Bond, who was the Hammond player and another sax player that was in Alexis's band, him, Ginger, and my dad broke away to form the Graham Bond organisation.
Well, the Graham Bond Quartet first, I think it was called.
Yeah, with Johnny McLaughlin.
Yeah, with John McLaughlin again.
So yeah, and then just it's really amazing to think about it looking back because we live in such a different world. But at that point, things were moving so quickly. So you know. By 62, Alexis Corner, there's a famous Graham Bond album called Sound of 65. And then by 66, they were forming Cream. But during that whole 5-6 year period, my dad was in Alexis's band, Graham Bond. He was in Man for Man. He was with John Mayall. He was like literally it was a small scene. And I think once you got established on that small scene, it's the same now, right? Yeah. You know, if people like you and respect you, then you're going to get asked to do all these different things. But it really was like the beginning of the whole of modern rock music. You know, they didn't call it rock music; they called it R&B.
So, Graham Bond was a bit of a character, wasn't he? Because he thought he was Aleister Crowley's son, didn't he? Apparently,
he did. He somehow ended up thinking that he was Aleister Crowley's illegitimate son. And you know, a lot of those guys. I mean, Ginger was a registered heroin addict before Cream. You know,
wow, I didn't know.
And one of the provisos to form Cream was that he would stop taking those hard drugs, and he did actually do it. He stopped. He ended up starting again towards the end, you know, as Cream was sort of falling apart through overwork. He started doing it again, and I think Graham as well had been a heroin addict for, you know, quite a long time.
He threw himself under a train in the end, didn't he?
Well, again, that's the official story, but the other story is that he owed someone money for drugs, and he was running away from somebody and fell or got pushed, or it's Finsbury Park Station in North London, yeah.
Because it was also, Ginger fired your dad from the Graham, because he put Ginger in charge, didn't he, of the band, Graham Bond did, and then he fired your dad.
With a knife, in fact. But my mum always tells me this story that she turned up once to a rehearsal with early Cream rehearsal. It might have been a Alexis or Graham Bond rehearsal, and she kind of opened the door at the wrong moment, and this knife kind of go bang into the wall, like next to her head, you know, and it's Ginger like, don't you ever fucking, you know, whatever. So yeah. But I mean, my mum loved Ginger, you know, they got on great, and they had, you know, she was with them all the way through from rags to riches, as it were, you know, so.
They had it's funny, the relationship between your dad and Ginger, and sort of, you know, as much as they fought, they continued to work with each other over the years, you know, even when they formed BBM with Gary Moore, you know, after Cream, you know, obviously we'll talk about the Cream thing, but, you know, so no matter what, they seem to be somehow cosmically joined.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's obviously they have one of those stories. I mean, actually, when I hung out with Andy Summers and my dad for a week in LA years ago, they were kind of comparing notes, almost competing about like who had the most dysfunctional band, you know, because the Police, again, a little later on, had a similar kind of thing where they, you know, ended up hating each other. And Andy's like, yeah, you know, we were biggest band in the world, but we would travel in separate limos to the sound check and then go our separate ways and then do the gig and then go our separate ways. And, you know, so I think there was an element of that. But I have to say, and actually me and Ginger's eldest daughter, Nettie, we've talked about this a little bit online recently, because she's running the Ginger page, and lots of photos keep appearing from the past and everything. And it's always nice when you see a photo of me, my dad and Ginger, and they're smiling, or they've got an arm around each other or whatever. So, you know, even though the mythology is that they hated each other, they loved each other. And and musically, they knew they had this synergy, something very, very special. Maybe it was because they worked, you know, Graham Bond would do 250, 300 gigs a year, you know.
Wow.
And this is like when they only, I don't know how many motorways, they might have had one proper road in London going from north to south, but they were driving in a van and somebody's sitting on the wheel hub at the back holding the amps or whatever, like old school, like coming up the hard way thing. So they had that, they were brothers, Jack and Ginger in that way. But I think egos, drug addictions, money, fame, all of that stuff can change people. And I think more and more, I mean, now it's different because you go and do a degree in how to make it in the music business, Right. But back then they were inventing it. They didn't know how.
It was the Wild West, wasn't it?
Yeah, so they were like working class, especially with pop music. The majority, maybe John Mayall was a little different because I think he was born into money and a few examples of that. But I think most young kids in the 60s coming up and inventing that genre that we're now kind of standing on the shoulder of what they did. I think a lot of those people were just working class. They never had any money.
It
they didn't
really
come
happen
from
anymore, does it? The working class thing.
It's become like a bourgeois. Now. Like if your parents can give you $250,000 to live on for 3 years while you're getting your career together, then you can manage to do it.
And just going back to Cream for a second, so didn't Eric would only join the band if Jack was in the band? Because he decided to Ginger was forming the band, wasn't it? And Eric said, "Look, I'll only join if Jack is in the band." Is that the truth of it?
I think the story goes that Ginger and his wife, his first wife Liz, who was lovely, I knew her. They drove up to Oxford where Eric was playing with John Mayall, and at the end of the show, they had a drink in the pub, and Ginger asked Eric, "Would you like to put a band together?" And Eric said, "Yeah, but I'd like to have Jack on bass." And this was after they'd fallen out at knife point or whatever. So Ginger kind of begrudgingly called up my dad and said, "Oh, all right, Jack, we're going to put this band together and Eric wants you to be we'd like you to do it." And so they actually had a meeting at my grandparents' house, like neutral territory, my mum's parents, and they kind of shook hands and it was the deal, and then they just started rehearsing and it just flew off the handles. And actually, I think the very first song that originally, they started off just doing blues covers. Like a lot of those bands, probably from that time, they'd start off just the music that maybe we all do that, right?
Sure.
But the very first original song they wrote was written by my mum. So my mum wrote the lyrics to a song called Sleepy Time Time, and then gave my dad the words, and he just went off and wrote. It's kind of a blues, but it's a blues with a little twist. So, you know, that's one of my mum's claims to fame. But she also co-wrote 2 songs on the Graham Bond record I mentioned, Sound of 65. So, yeah, it's really interesting. It's family, you know. It came from humble beginnings, you know. Even Eric was, you know, just a guy. I think he was like thinking about giving up music at one point and driving across. I think he just was going to drive across Europe or something, and then his car broke down. I don't know. There was an innocence to that time, I think.
Yeah, I think they knew what they had, though, when they played together. And I think that was the thing that gelled them for the 2 years. I mean, 4 albums over 2 years and 15 million sales. Huge, if you think about it. Yeah. But I remember your dad telling me about one particular gig in America they were playing. I think it was in front of 10,000 people. And he just finished a bass solo. And then Ginger was playing his drum solo. And he just stopped and he looked at Jack and he went, "You played some fucking notes on my solo," jumped off the kit, punched your dad in the face. Your dad went down and he pulled a knife at him, always with the knife.
Always with the knife.
In front of like 10,000 people. It was like, you couldn't ride it. It was like, but for whatever reason, I mean, they held it together for 2 years. And as I said, going on to work then with Gary Moore and, you know, so they kind of knew they had something, you know, regardless of the craziness between them over the years, you know, the animosity.
I think they were incredible musicians. I mean, we can talk about technique and all of that stuff in terms of art, but actually it's deeper than that. There was just a feel, a sensibility, an understanding. You can't learn that stuff. Maybe you can learn it through experience, but I think that they just had that synergistic thing. They came together and it's like, wow, this is really happening. And all those disparate elements as well. You know, actually I did a podcast about a year ago in Pontefract near Leeds in the UK, and we did a talk on the album Fresh Cream, which was their first record, and we listened to the original vinyl, and it's revelatory. You hear Ginger Baker's solo on that, Toad, and you hear these African elements, and this is like 1966. Where is he getting? He'd assimilated jazz, blues, African, and you know, then my dad was bringing Scottish folk music. He was bringing classical ideas and also the blues and jazz and all of these. And Eric was more like the blues purist who'd studied the Kings, you know, Albert King, Freddie King, B.B. King, and he'd mastered that style. So, you know, they all were at the top of their game, but they weren't just, they were studied musicians. That we call them rote in America, rote musicians, like they could, Eric less so, but, you know, Jack and Ginger were, you know, jazzers, you know, they understood music and they understood the potentialities of music. They weren't just sitting writing a pop song and, it's got, you know, they actually understood what music, the potentialities within it.
It was funny though, when again, chatting with your dad, and he was telling me, like, asking what he liked musically when I first met him, and like he hated nearly everything contemporary, like say, like Pink Floyd hate them, Led Zeppelin hate them, you know, like, and then he loved he named all the jazz guys, but then I'd say the Beatles, love the Beatles. I mean, it's funny doing the podcast, like all of the top jazz guys all love the Beatles. We had Al Di Meola on it, and we had Greg Cow, and we had Mike Stern. They all love like
classical musicians, like, you know, a lot of classical musicians would be like a bit sort of uptight or a bit derogatory about pop music, but they all love the Beatles because I think the Beatles had a sense of, and I think George Martin might have had a part in that too, but they had a sense of like what classical musicians would call voice leading. So you would have the way that chords go from one to another, transitions, the understanding of how notes can work rather than it just being blocks. Okay, here's a chord of E, here's a chord of A. How would you go from E to A in that very musical way where the notes flow between each other? And you hear that those elements are such an integral part of the Beatles' music. It's really musical pop music, you know. It's just great. I mean, everyone loves the Beatles, don't they?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Probably everyone.
And I was, again, just doing the you know, the research this morning. Of course, I knew Jack very well. As you know, you're his son, you knew him better than anybody. But it was kind of, I don't think it's appreciated what a huge impact all of those musicians had together as a band, but also individually. Like if you think of how everything spiraled off, and you know, and the impact that had in the formation of rock and blues and even contemporary music today. And I think it's often forgotten about the huge impact they had. Massive.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, Scooter Weintraub, who produced the Cream Reunion DVD, I believe. But anyway, he's Sheryl Crow's manager, and they got together when they were working with Michael Jackson. Sheryl was a backing vocalist for Michael. Scooter was working for Michael. Then they broke away and created Sheryl's career. But I had a couple of chats with him, and he said the same thing. It's like you might not even realize how that your dad basically invented this, modern rock music, and I think my dad is, maybe people don't know about him as much as someone like Eric. Obviously, Eric's had the big name and the big career, but in terms of creativity and the potential in creativity, my dad is a very unique, I certainly love him for that, and learned so much by just being around him and working with him sometimes, or just playing music at home. Just that openness and the breadth of understanding of music. You're going beyond. We talked about this in the past too. It's like identity politics, where everyone's stuck on the surface, race, gender, blah, 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 instead of character. And like everybody is equal. There's no better or worse. We're judging things on the color of someone's skin instead of their character, And it's like music. People are judging music on genre, but there aren't genres. And I think my dad really understood that. It's like, it's just a wide open, infinite potential within creativity, All right, so you might want to direct it into a 3.5-minute pop song because you want to get it on the radio. That's cool too, but there's so much more to music. And I think in his own way, my dad always wanted to bring in elements of that expansiveness into his work and almost play a game with himself and the public. Like, can I get away with that, within a pop context?
Yeah, I remember even reading about Pink Floyd, and they went to before they formed Pink Floyd, and they went to see a Cream gig and decided to form Pink Floyd after seeing a Cream show.
Yeah.
It would be, without Cream, there would have been no Pink Floyd. And the same with Zeppelin. Some of the early Zeppelin is very close. Even chordally, riff-wise to some of the early, some of the early.
But they were a Paul. To be fair, like Jimmy Page had been a producer as well as a session guitarist, but he'd produced Eric in the studio on sessions. They'd all kind of crossed paths, so they all knew each other. And then, as I said before, in that very short space of time, they went from this like little London or UK scene of musicians to a point where they were changing the world. Of course, then all the corporations probably came in and sort of said, "Oh, how much money can we make out of this?" And maybe we can change that bit and change. But there was an innocence and a kind of purity of creativity at that small moment.
I think there's something to be said. There was a community. Obviously they're all jumping into different bands, but there was a foundation and a community you could exist in. You weren't on your own. Like now, for instance, most artists are on their own. It's very difficult to have a band, So it's like, and you don't have that cross-fertilization between players, which in those days they did. And this is where all this amazing music came out of and was the foundation of everything. I think that's lacking a bit today with the corporatization of music. And also, I don't want to get too old fart about this, but, how people, focus too much on the business side instead of the relationships between musicians. And London now, there isn't that scene, let's be honest. You have a band, they come, they go, but this kind of cross-fertilization doesn't seem to happen as much as it did back in the day and created all of this amazing music over time.
Yeah, I think it's become about making money, and the music is almost secondary now, and I think that's a shame. But that's just the inevitability of the way things are going. I think we can fight it to some degree, but we've got AI. The whole AI thing now. AI music. I heard a record recently. There was a Django Reinhardt record, and it was phenomenal. I was like, I've heard quite a lot of Django. I've never heard this before. And the guy said, yeah, because it doesn't exist. It was made up. It's an AI Django Reinhardt record.
Yeah, it is quite incredible what it can do. But where's the soul?
There's no soul.
They can even fake the soul to a point because everything is so cynically made in pop music these days. But going back to your dad again and all the different collaborations he did, even playing with Lou Reed. I remember he played on Berlin on the album. And I remember actually Bowie covered one of Cream's songs as well, didn't he? I think he covered I Feel Free on one of his records as well.
He was a big fan. Yeah, he was a big fan and actually did that song a lot. He would play it live Spiders of Mars times, I think, going back quite far. And then he did Black Tie, White Noise, I think the album's called, where he did in my opinion, slightly dodgy recorded version of it. It's a little bit dirgy. It's very different from the original, which is a phenomenal song, and one of the first songs they did. And you can hear those influences of like Motown and the stuff that they were listening to at the time in that song in particular. It's kind of got that ba 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 da ba. You know, it's a kind of almost like doo-wop or something. You know, but yes, David did a version of that song. I think he was a big fan. And then we were we made a record with my dad around the year 2000 in New York City at Sorcerer Sound. And we were trying to find him because he'd bought, like, David Bowie had bought like all this property in upstate New York. So he was around and people would say, yeah, no, he turns up with his saxophone and sits in with people sometimes. So we were trying to like get him to come and play. We couldn't find him. But I think if we'd found him, he would have come and done it.
Oh, well, they got to know each other after that.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I remember when we were doing Silver Rails at Abbey Road and we'd finished the album, and I've just finished mixing it. And I was talking with your dad and he's like, Rob, we should have got David. I was like, please don't say to David, I think you're going to say, yeah, we should have got David on the record. And I'm like, what, David Bowie? Yeah. I was like, we could have had Bowie on the record.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the respect that he had, like, you know, from Louis to Bowie, like all these other alternative artists, about like huge names, it knows no bounds. He was one of the greatest bass players that ever lived. And not only that, a great cello player, great piano player, great writer, great singer. I mean, you know, again, I don't think you can blow it out of proportion. He just was a king, you know, of his time, in my view, and one of the most lovely, beautiful human beings I've ever met. You know, like obviously meeting you, and then the time I spent with your dad was really precious to me. You know, I miss him terribly, even to this day.
I think everyone that, you know, I think we all do, because he had a very unique, well, as you know, like a very unique take on life, his own way of seeing things. And, you know, it's always different when you're the kid of someone, like the parent is always going to be like a bit hard on the kid sometimes, where he's like not, you know, it's a different relationship. But, you know, of course I miss him. I love him. And, sometimes it does pop into my mind. Well, I wonder what he'd think about what's going on now, you know, in politics or like the world or whatever, you know. I mean, you know, if he is up there like looking down, then he's probably thinking, interesting times, you know.
Well, he always spoke hugely highly about you. You know, when we had conversations. Well, typical dad. But he honestly, hand on my heart, he did. And he really respected you as a musician. And on Civil Rise, we had a lot of fun. And you did all the arranging on that. You did a brilliant job. And it was such a brilliant record.
Oh, I mean, it's a great production on that record.
Thank you. But I just, you know, we had everybody on it, you know, when we...
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt that it was done at Abbey Road as well. So.
Yeah, well, that was, you know, there's a long story about that. I probably, you know, how it ended up being at Abbey Road, but maybe I'll tell it another time. But... You know, it was kind of funny going from that. And it was obviously we had Robin Trower on it. We had John Medeski. We had Phil Manzanera. Cindy Blackman Santana. We had you. We had Frank Tonto from Amy Winehouse. And it was just a brilliant band of people. And the thing I remember the most about it was just the joy in the room. And Jack kind of was the center of that. It was just fun. There was so much fun.
He knew he was reaching the end. You know, I mean, none of us... You know, he'd had a liver transplant and he got another 11 years out of life. But, you know, none of us can know. Like, and he struggled with his health. Maybe all transplant survivors will struggle for the rest of their lives, up and down. But he had significant health struggles. But he still managed to go out and tour. And I think he wanted to make that record the best he could and have the most fun and make it a wonderful experience, because I think he knew. I think maybe even if he wasn't saying it, I think deep down he knew.
He did,
he's like, I'm getting towards the end. And you know, we had a similar experience with his writing partner Pete Brown, didn't we? Like when we made Pete's record, and Pete was basically dying while we were making the record, and he was a trooper about it, you know.
Yeah, he was just,
and it was kind of ironic that he'd like. Pete was very anti-drugs and alcohol and given it all up in the 60s. And then the last time I saw him, he's like, got this angelic face saying, yeah, Malcolm, they've got me on medical marijuana. I'm like, okay, Pete.
Pete was amazing. Loved Pete. But again, going back to your dad, I remember when sort of towards the end, obviously, when we were making the record, and he would come, I would ring him up, and he'd ring me up and say, "Hey, Rob, what's happening in the studio today?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm just going to do some editing today." And I could kind of hear him being, "Oh, all right then." And then I could see he really wanted to come to Abbey Road. So I'd say, "Well, actually, we could do a couple of vocal ups." "Oh, just getting in the car," So we'd jump in the car and he would drive, because it was quite a drive living in Essex. And he would come to the studio, but he was so ill, but he wanted to be there. And there was sometimes he was standing behind the mic. I thought he was going to drop that in front of me. He looked so ill, and it was like he had hardly any energy, but he wants to be there. And he, as you said, he wants to give it everything, right to the very end.
Yeah, he loved to work. I mean, he was he had a lot of issues. Like, to be frank about it, he had addictions and a lot of bad behaviors over the years. An unresolved part of him was very unresolved and would play games and be a naughty boy, and all of that stuff. But it was kind of a layer that when, at the times that he put it to one side, he was the most genuine, incredible, loving, intelligent, giving person. And I think he wanted to give his all in that situation. But I think he always did with music. Yeah. I don't think there was ever a moment. He's like one of those guys that would say, the show must go on. I'm never going to cancel a gig, or, he would always want to work. And I think, he would have respected someone like you because he saw that you were like that. You're probably almost as bad as me, or maybe you're worse than me. Like the OCD workaholic.
Yeah, well, it's just...
But I mean, it just comes with the territory, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, when you're working class, it's your way out. And there's always there's that element to it as well. When you're growing up, sort of needing to strive and be somebody to get out of your situation. It was like, that was me. Yeah. And it was the same with your dad.
It's good motivation.
Growing up in Scotland, growing up in Glasgow, hardcore,
and then he put me in a private school, and I didn't get a working class accent. So it's almost like, I remember there was one time he was almost putting me down for it. It's like, but it's not my fault. You put me in a posh school.
I mean, obviously, it must have been quite difficult for Jack. We spoke about it briefly, your dad and I, but about Jonas and when Jonas died. I mean, and for you, it must have been really a terrible time.
Yeah, so you're mentioning my brother, 1997, which is now, that's a long time ago.
Because he was a musician as well.
A very successful one. He was a founder member of Afro-Celt Sound System. They were signed to Real World, had huge success. And he also made a record with Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan because of the Real World, with a guy called Michael Brook. But yes, I mean, it's weird.
Were you close?
Very close, yeah. Super close. It's a strange one. I don't know whether I've even sort of faced my grief fully with that one. Maybe I never will be able to. I don't know. I just kind of go. And actually, I'm kind of going through my and my mother's photo collection at the moment and scanning and it's emotional to see all these photos of me and my brother when we were kids and growing up and everything. But this is life, right? Life is very transitory. We get sort of caught up in the ego, but it's very fleeting.
But to lose a child,
my mum, it was very hard on my mum for sure, and my dad. And I think my dad, maybe didn't express it as much, but I think it really hurt him, and perhaps parents. I mean, I have a daughter, who I would lie in the middle of the road for,
of course.
That's the feeling you have when you're a parent.
And what happened with Jonas? How did he die?
Well, they'd been touring for a year and a half, maybe, with Afro-Celt, and I think he'd been doing quite a lot of drugs on the road, which is just
heavy drugs, hard drugs,
possibly. I don't know for sure, but he also had very bad asthma, so I think it was like an asthma attack officially. But it's just he lived. He was 27 when he passed away as well. Of course.
Wow. Did you ever play together?
Yeah, we did loads of stuff together. But then kind of our paths, went in different directions. But we did loads of stuff. And, we're at the age where with my dad, we were getting into the early music, like home music technology. So when my dad remarried my stepmom, Margaret, and moved, they were living in Germany for about 7 years before they moved back to the UK. And me and my brother would go over in the holidays, and my dad, there was one time, he's like, I bought a Tascam 4-track, let's make a record. So literally in the like Christmas holidays, we made a record at home in the basement with a 4-track and bouncing and like and this is the time where he had a Yamaha DX7, you know, ooh,
Brilliant.
you know. So and I've still got that somewhere. We've got like this album made of 4-track. On a 4-track, you know.
Yeah, amazing. And what was being played around the house at the time? I mean, what was your dad playing that was influencing you? Besides him as a musician, what kind of records
he
did
liked
play?
to listen to the things that he was doing at the time or whatever. But, you know, my dad liked classical music, so we'd listen to, he loved Ravel, Stravinsky, you know, some of the great, you know, contemporary classical artists. He loved Messiaen, Olivier Messiaen, the French composer. But he loved to listen to jazz at home too. But anything really, anything and everything. But I think a lot of what we did when we were kids was actually just playing music, you know. So I have a Hammond organ and a piano and a guitar and a bass, and we just jam. Might be a little bit of alcohol involved on his part in the evenings or whatever. But I think that was the influence, just that openness, that musical openness, you know.
And how come you didn't tour with him, really, didn't play in the band? Because, you know, I'm not just saying you're a fantastic musician. You can pick you're a really great piano player, great guitar player. I mean, as much as I love the guys that, you know, Jack had in his band, but, and no disrespect to anyone because they're fabulous, but you're as good as any of those guys. So was there, what do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a little bit of like, you've got, go out and make your life work, son. And that's what I did, you know. And I think my dad was very much like that. He wanted people to stand on their own 2 feet, find their own way. You know, I guess, you know, it's quite interesting with that. If somebody makes a lot of money and then they have kids, sometimes they'll really sort their kids out. Oh, I'll buy you a house and I'll buy you a car, and here, you know, you'll have $5,000 in your account per month, and don't worry about it. I love you, you know. But my dad was like the opposite of that. It's like, I'm not going to give you anything, you know. And it's like making a point of it,
sure,
you know.
Okay.
And I think maybe that's partly like the working class background. But I think it's, you know, at times I'm like, oh man, I wish you'd help me more. But actually, in hindsight, I think that was the right thing to do, because it teaches you to be your own person, you know. And there's a strength that you can develop your character. And I think so. Maybe he felt if he was just going to like have me in his band all the time, that it might not be the right thing to do. Having said that, I made 3 or 4 or 5 records with him. Like I was involved. 2 records in New York. I did one in San Francisco when I was a teenager, and the one with you. And
yeah, you did some great work on that. You made my life very easy with all those great arrangements that you did for that album.
Yeah, well,
so I thank you for that.
Oh no, I mean, no, but I mean, it's nice to be given like some demos that you can then go from, you know, as a template to go from. I guess it makes things a bit easier. But yeah, I did do a lot with him. I did play shows with him, and certainly when I was a teenager, we'd played in Budapest actually. In Italy, we played San Remo Blues Festival together and did a few things. And actually, he came and sat in at my gigs sometimes.
Excellent. And just like, obviously, Jack had his, you know, his addictions as well, and the heroin use. I remember speaking to him about that and asked him, like, why did you get into heroin? And he said that they just were kind of emulating their jazz heroes as well. There was a little bit of that going on. Do you remember that period and how difficult it was when he was having issues?
Oh, yeah. I remember a lot of it. It was, you know, quite traumatic for me and my brother, I would imagine. Yeah, I mean, you know, look, let's blame Charlie Parker Bird, you know, because Charlie was a junkie, you know, but he was the most incredible, you know, he changed the direction of jazz with bebop. Well, him along with Dizzy Gillespie and, you know,
Herbie Hancock
that pool of players of that classic era. And then, you know, Herbie a little later, Miles was emerging. You know, very young Miles was playing with those guys, but then kind of kept it all going. You know, I mean, they all were taking drugs. You know, it was of that time. I think it's a bit of a different time. Like now, like to be a successful musician, people tend to be like, I practice meditation and do yoga, you know, and it's like, you've got to keep yourself together. Okay, I'm going to keep myself together, you know, and it's like, so that's, for me, that seems to be a better approach.
Yeah.
But you can never know. Like, I mean, some people that take heroin say, yes, it's like a cushion, takes all the pain away, not just the physical pain, because it is a painkiller, you know. So if you, in the First World War, if you got your leg shot off in the trenches, they'd give you some morphine, you know, which is essentially an opiate. So, you know, the idea that maybe it just takes all the crap away that's stopping you being creative. And then you're just in this bubble of creativity. The downside of it is that it destroys you, you know? So I think there's that sweet spot, and that's where the addiction happens, where you can spend 6 months to a year and it's just helping you and helping you and helping you, just giving you this incredible sense of possibility. And then bang, you're addicted and you can't stop doing it, and it stops working. And then you're chasing that high and chasing that high.
Do you think it broke up your mum and dad? Was it the heroin or was it other things?
That's hard to say. I think it probably had a big... well, actually, I remember what happened. My dad was on tour with John McLaughlin across Europe, and he was clean, totally clean, and writing a diary and writing letters to my mum every day. Wow. And then it suddenly stopped. And guess who he'd met? My stepmom, Margaret.
Wow.
And he was off the wagon and back on the drugs. And it was like, okay, something went on there. You know, I don't know exactly what went on, but he was clean, you know. I think that's the thing with addiction. I mean, I used to smoke cigarettes, so I know, I mean, and maybe it's not the same level as heroin, but it's, in a way, it doesn't matter what the substance is, it's the behaviors, you know, and when you're an addict, and so I have that addictive side to me, I have to be really careful. So I just gave up coffee as well.
Could never give up
no coffee. But, you know, it's that thing that you're trying to use something to help you, when actually those, you know, if it's triggering neurochemicals to give you a buzz or whatever, you've got all of that intrinsically within the self. But our culture doesn't teach us how to access that. It doesn't teach us that if we just relax, we can actually get that sense of well-being that will just emerge just through just being, just letting go, just feeling the body in the moment, you know.
Sure.
So we're just like, oh, but if I take that drug, then it will give me a sense of that. It'll give me like an analogous feeling of that well-being, but it's at a cost. You're destroying your body, or you're destroying your relationships because you start having to lie about what you're doing. And then you tend to gravitate towards people that give you more understanding, whereas the people that you really should be with, who are like, what the hell are you doing, man? You're trying to avoid them because you don't want to hear that at the time, you know. So yes, I think it does cause a lot of problems with relationships.
It was a huge thing, you know, at the time with obviously Miles Davis. And then also you mentioned John McLaughlin, and then obviously your dad played with Tony Williams as well. Like incredible player.
Yeah, the best.
And that was Lifetime, I think it was called, wasn't it, this band?
That was Lifetime, yeah. There was the first version of Lifetime was a trio with Larry Young on Hammond organ and McLaughlin on guitar and Tony. And then they brought my dad in just after that. But it was just too far ahead of its time. Actually, Bob Adcock, who was the Cream tour manager, we're still friends on Facebook, and I posted, it was Tony Williams' birthday a few days ago, so I posted a picture of him, my dad and Larry on stage. And Bob wrote, oh, it's the best band I'd have ever toured, because he did the tours with them as well. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think sometimes bands come along and they're just, I wouldn't say ahead of their time, but it's just a different thing. It's too different. And they were so good. And apparently they were the loudest band of all time, you know, like the loudest jazz band of all time, you know. And my friend John Altman, who's an Emmy Award-winning saxophonist, composer, he said, oh yeah, I was at their gig in Brighton. My hearing is still recovering.
And so when you spoke to your dad in the past about, did he have a favorite era, like a time he really, like say a collaboration he enjoyed the most?
Well, that Lifetime was the thing that
really?
Okay. I think he really felt, because him and Tony, you know, they loved each other. They were the best of friends. Tony actually stayed with us. I can't remember because I was too young, but he sort of lived with us for a while they were working. And there's the famous thing that my dad drove his Ferrari into someone's front room just near Birmingham Airport in the UK with Tony in the passenger seat.
Really?
And then I met this guy.
Actually, I remember hearing
subsequent
about
to that, this lovely and very well-respected guy, actually the guy that founded the Music Managers Forum, Dennis Muirhead. He was my dad's lawyer in the case to try and get him to stay out of jail because he'd been driving at 120 miles an hour into someone's front room, you know, with Tony. But I mean, basically, I know you had Dennis Chambers here recently, and you've had amazing people here at dopeYEAH and the podcast and everything. But I mean, everybody, if you asked Dennis, if you asked any drummer, they would say Tony was the guy. You know, he was the great drummer, certainly one of the top 3 great jazz drummers of our time. But I mean, a lot of people would say he was the greatest. And, you know, I think that my dad really respected him as a musician. And I think Tony really understood who my dad was. You know, that's the thing. I think my dad is a little obscure simply because he was so good. But sometimes in pop music, there's a certain thing it needs to be very much a particular thing, you know, and he was just so maybe too bigger than that, because he's like doing pop music with Cream, which then it became something else, but it started off as like pop songs in a way. But then he's doing jazz with the great jazz musicians. You know, they were Miles and him and Tony were talking about doing something at one point. You know, the possibilities were endless. There were no limitations to it, you know.
It was funny when I went out with your dad one night, and Jack and I were sitting in Ronnie's, actually, bragging now, but it was a great night. We had a fantastic, it was like the scene from Goodfellas, like we walk in and they, you know, it's funny, we were leaving our coats in and the girl didn't notice your dad, and it was like, but behind was a huge poster of your dad.
They still have a photo on the wall.
And it was just bizarre. And then they came out with the tablecloth and put a bottle of wine. But he was telling me stories that night, and the best story, I think this is just so bizarre but amazing story. So, I mean, for people out there in podcast land who, you know, don't know much about London gangsters, you know, the Cray twins, very famous crime family in the UK. And Jack told me that, you know, I think it was Reggie was a massive Cream and Jack Bruce fan. So he obviously went to jail for murder, yes. Reggie Cray. And they smuggled him out of prison to have dinner with Jack and smuggled him back in. I mean, Jack told me that story. I know he wouldn't lie to me.
I don't doubt it, man. I mean, the Crays, firstly, that would be easy for the Crays to do because they had some influence.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like pull a few strings, get me out for the day, you know.
But that's how, you know, his love transcended everything, you know what I mean? Like to the Crays, come on.
But I mean, that's the thing, like, it is a strange thing, you know, as Mel says in The Producers, you know, he says, not many people know this, but Hitler was a wonderful dancer. So that kind of sums it up, right? You know, like even evil people can be kind of cool to hang out with. Like you can have a good time with them as long as they don't murder you and put you in a ditch. You'll be fine, you know.
Very few people are all bad. There's a little corner somewhere of something, but you know, that sort of lends itself to being a decent human, but it might be a small bit. But
I mean, the Hitler one's a bit of a stretch, but
that's a stretch. But obviously, then you know, great, amazing life with your dad, and with its ups and downs and challenges, and but you know, you and I obviously got to work on the Heavenly Cream album. We had a lot of fun on that, and we got Ginger on it.
Yes,
and then that was an experience in itself, because it was the last time he ever recorded. You know, that was the last time Ginger ever recorded. But I remember when he came in. If you remember the fact, there was you, when we had Bernie Marsden on guitar, we had Joe Bonamassa on guitar, Neil Murray on bass. I had you on piano. I think you were playing piano.
I was playing piano on that show.
Piano. Neil Murray on bass. Bernie Marsden on guitar, Joe Bonamassa on guitar, and Ginger on drums. And I remember when
That was the second session we did, second day,
The second day. And I remember when because we rehearsed it, and everybody was, you know, we got a drummer in, a friend of mine, to kind of just rehearse everybody. Everybody's ready. And Ginger came in. I remember saying to him, so Ginger, would you, like to, to rehearse it? Oh, no, just a fucking 1, 2, 3, let's go. And he gets me on the kit and say, 1, 2, 3, and it was terrible. We all stopped. Everybody just stared at me, and I just wanted the ground to open up. It was awful. You know?
Okay, what are you going to do now, Mr. Producer?
And it was all being filmed as well. But in 4th or 5th time, you know, we nailed it. But I remember walking back to the green room with Bernie. We were walking back with Ginger, and he just said, you know, I can't play anymore. And it kind of broke my heart. He was kind of still playing out that role as the bad boy, you know what I mean? He was like, I can't fucking play, mate. And I just really, it kind of, it was heartbreaking to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, Ginger was a super intelligent guy. You know, he was a painter, an artist, and well-read, and, you know, but he did end up playing that game. But I saw both sides to him. Like there were, most of the time, he was like that gruff exterior, like, what do you want? Kind of thing, but he was putting that on. I think it was a defense mechanism, you know. I think.
Remember that when we asked him to do another take. I said, well, just one more take. Ginger goes, "You're trying to fucking kill me." Yeah. And I was like, well, the thought did cross my mind, Ginger. But it was wonderful. And, I did feel he knew he was at the end there as well. It was, he was really ill, but he turned up. You know what he was present and he did the job.
He did it, and I think he wanted to be there. It was a beautiful thing, and I think we'll carry that with us as a great experience because, as you say, it was his final session.
And just getting on to your challenges, like I know it's a difficult subject, and to sort of get your head around, but. Growing up...
Don't worry, I've done lots of therapy.
But growing up being the son of someone as famous and hugely influential, you talk very graciously and generously about your dad and the love and the respect you had for him. But for you as a person, it must be difficult. There has to be difficulties in being the son of someone that famous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I completely understand it top to bottom, but certainly... it's probably even more than, as I've told you before, the externality of that is that there's an expectation that you will be the same as your dad, that you'll just basically like him, which I'm not. I mean, of course, there are analogous elements to us. When I sing, there's a kind of resonance in the tone that is similar to him in its own way. But I mean, that's all the external stuff, other people's expectations, but it's almost like the internalization, all of that. And like, okay, that's not good enough. Okay, I need to do, all right, 764 takes later, still not good enough. Right. So like there's a kind of perfectionism in that, whereas my dad didn't have that. He was very open and loose about those things. He'd do a few takes or something in the musical context. So yes, I think... you can kind of inherit insecurities and perfectionism, which is a kind of form of procrastination in a way, And maybe that's why I'm kind of at this stage and I still feel like I'm just starting out, even though I've got a pretty impressive resume, as it were. I've worked with all kinds of people and done loads of different things. But as a writer and as an artist myself, I feel like I'm really excited. I feel like I'm still at the beginning of that journey. And if I can make the right moves creatively and come up with the right stuff, I think I've really got something to say, But it is finding a way to do that in an industry that's kind of in flux. I mean, I'm sure you know a lot more than I do because you're right at the heart of that, the more business side of the business. But it's finding a way forward with it, getting budgets to do things, because I'm in the middle of writing an opera, and it's not cheap to put on an opera, Apparently you need like 300 grand to put on an opera, So like I'm still doing things in stages and figuring out the process of how to make things happen. You know?
I think it's, you're quite hard on yourself. We know each other, as I said, now since 2013, and excuse me, I think you're very tough on yourself. And I think, I understand that. I was similar to, dare I say your dad, comparing myself to your dad, but driven and kind of just pretty gung-ho, I would just go for it, But the expectation within yourself is just very, very high. And I will just make mistakes and just brush it off onto the next thing. But I think, and I do see similarities between we had a podcast with Danny Harrison and, and then I've known several people who have the sons of very famous people, like also Jim Palmer is a good mate, Robert Palmer's son. And there is a kind of a theme here, where they're all crazily kind of critical of themselves, and I don't keep going back to that, but in end of the day, I think it's more of a disadvantage in a way to have a famous dad in a lot of ways.
I think it is, because it's like we would say second guessing yourself, whereas like maybe those original guys, they didn't care, they just did it, and they just, as you say, like they're not worried about it, just do it, move on. Whereas I'm like, okay, I've released one song in 75 years and I'm still not happy with it, So it's like, I mean, I think but then also all of that stuff, if someone in my position can work through it, then actually I'm in a really unique position, because I have been fortunate to have insight and to be around some of the most iconic, incredible, creative people of our time, And so hopefully if a little bit of that rubs off, then I'm in a good place,
You've been doing Sons of Cream recently as well, which is obviously, a tribute to Cream's music, and it's been a huge success. I remember when you were first talking about it, and you'd made it reality. A huge amount of work involved in putting that together, and you've kind of been at the center of it all, driving the whole thing. And have you enjoyed it, the whole process?
It's been great. I mean, it's funny because Kofi Baker, who's Ginger's son, I've known him since we were teenagers, and we've had a similar, a little bit similar, like off-on friendship, relationship, working relationship as my dad and Ginger. And but we love each other. I love the guy. I mean, he's
the drummer in the band.
He's the drummer in the band, and he's kind of taken what his dad did in his own direction. He's amazing. He's kind of very polyrhythmic in his approach. But we also kind of have a little bit of friction, trusting each other, and and Kofi's a real character. He's definitely his dad's son, I know,
but I saw that documentary, and he was, Ginger was very hard on him.
Oh,
like when he turns around and he can't really play.
No, he had a terrible time.
The trauma and the insecurities he must be dealing with. When you see see Beware Mr. Baker, whatever, Beware of Mr. Baker, how could he not be traumatized?
No, I mean, I feel for Kofi because I think he did struggle. I think I had a kind of close relationship with my dad for my whole life and his whole life. We had that, and we had difficulties but maybe all parents and kids have you have your challenges because the child is becoming their own person, but the parent is always going to be the parent. It's complicated stuff, isn't it? Parent-child relationship.
Sure.
But I think with Kofi, his dad left quite early on and then was always really cruel on him, cruel towards him and put him down. But I mean, I've said this to Kofi, look, try and just understand that he actually really loved you. And I think he just didn't really know how to express that. And I think that's very common too, like especially the father-son, where the father is like doubly cruel because he can't just go, oh, I love you, son. It's like, okay, I'm going to be really cruel. Like, I'm doing it for your own good. That clip round the ear was for chaining you to the fence outside when it's minus 10 degrees. It's good for you. So, yeah, there's all of that with Kofi. But, he's doing all right. He's, he's standing on his own. He's a US citizen now and he's, owns his own house and he's had his own success and done it on his own terms. And so, yeah, we're really excited. We're actually we're talking about doing a record of original music next year. And if that comes together, that could be a really interesting experience to see what the sons of Cream would do, if they wrote a record. So we'll see.
And what direction would you go in for that, you think?
Well, I'm thinking Linkin Park, no, but seriously, like, why not make a kind of contemporary rock record still with, Kofi's he's such an idiosyncratic drummer. You couldn't say, could you play like another drummer? That would be silly. But I think it's something that's contemporary,
Does he play like his dad?
He does a little bit, I think, but he's kind of taken it in his own direction.
Do you see Ginger in him? Like sometimes, like I see your dad in you, and I look at you sometimes. Oh my God, he's here, right in the room again.
Well, there's a sense of. I think me and my dad shared a sense of humor. I'm sure I inherited a lot of that. We would, we'd sit, in the evening and watch, the Marx Brothers a night at the opera or what. Like we had. Maybe families share a sense of humor sometimes, or I mean, maybe I learnt it from him, but he had that. Well, you knew, he had a kind of wicked sense of humor and a certain take on how he would see things. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think Ginger and Kofi, there are probably genetic elements. But yeah, I mean, look, Kofi saw his dad at the end when Ginger passed away. They got to spend some time together, and I think he's okay with it, It's difficult. All of this life stuff can be challenging for all of us, yeah.
I mean, the trauma, I said, growing up with a famous dad, going back to that again, is, it can't be underestimated how much trauma is involved in, just in generally being, a parent and a child. But I think it's exacerbated so much more with all that attention and expectation.
And they probably didn't know how to handle it. I mean, if you're like a working class kid and like 3 years later, people are knocking on your hotel room going, would you like to sleep with my wife? Or like, here's a bag of drugs and would you like to sleep with my wife? I mean, how do you handle all that stuff when you're a 23-year-old kid? They didn't know. No one had ever done that before. All right, the Beatles had the most intense experience of that a few years prior. So I guess there was that, but nobody had understood. No one understood what that. We can't understand what that must have been like.
And they had that, obviously, like, 15 million albums over 2 years, like 4 albums, but didn't really make that much money.
Well, Robert Stigwood was their manager, and I think they signed, there's probably an idiomatic way of saying this, but they signed sort of dodgy contracts that, and they got ripped off. What they should have got is not what they got. And there was a big court case, I believe, in the 1980s where they had a settlement from the Stigwood organization. But, that is the music business, isn't it? Like it's still, maybe it's tightened up now. There's a little bit more.
I think he funneled that money, didn't he, Stigwood, into Greece and.
Because
he was the producer on that, wasn't he? One of the, I think it was.
Yeah, the Bee Gees was the first thing. So he was managing the Bee Gees at the same time as Cream. In fact, I've got some great photos of Cream and the Bee Gees with Stigwood in an airport lounge, right, with Eric and Ginger looking like they'd sort of spent a week on LSD or something, like the weirdest photograph. But amazing, actually. So, yes, it was the Bee Gees, and then Andrew Lloyd Webber, he kind of launched, I guess it was Joseph, maybe was the first one. Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And then obviously the, Andrew Lloyd Webber phenomenon that happened was all Stigwood. And the Bee Gees, obviously, they did some of the music for Saturday Night Fever and Grease, obviously. So, yeah, I guess he put the money to good use.
Do you think it's fair to say that Eric agreed to the reunion gigs, like in, what year was it, 2000?
2005, I think.
2005, because he knew Jack had health problems, and obviously Ginger wasn't, had, I think, really bad arthritis or something. But also because they hadn't made a lot of money back in the day, he kind of agreed to it to help them, obviously to play together again, but a lot of it also was to do with the fact that he wanted to see them all right into their later age. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I think certainly I would say that Eric would have thought, if we're going to do it, we should do it now, right, after Jack's health problems. So I think, credit to my stepmom, Margaret. I think that she maybe floated the idea to Eric. And, in Margaret's inimitable style, probably said, Eric, we should really do this. Jack has not been well, or whatever. I mean, but it's a no-brainer to do something like that. And I think, yes, they couldn't have left it too much longer. It wouldn't have made sense. And, it's unfortunate they didn't do a little bit more, because I heard they were getting offers from Japan and America, like silly offers, They made some money, and I think it set everyone up, to be comfortable. But I'm talking silly money. If they'd kept it going, like the 500 million rather than the 5 million,
Sure. It was funny though. I'm Irish. We laugh. We kind of take the piss out of death. But I remember being at your dad's funeral, and it was Ginger was sitting just behind me. I was out in the front row. Very kindly, people had put me in the front row, and you were there. And I remember Ginger was behind me, and he kept tapping, like rhythms on the pew. It's like, as I kept looking around, as Ginger tapping away, and then as the person doing the sermon said, "Can everybody stand up?" Jim, "Oh, for fuck's sake, I'm going to stand up." And I was, "Oh, Jay, sitting down now." But then I remember seeing him at the end, and he was in floods of tears.
Well, actually, at the beginning as well, I was standing outside the chapel where we were in North London, and I was standing with Eric, a few people, and Eric and Ginger was no holds barred, bawling his eyes out. He was so upset, and Eric was talking to someone about his next tour. He was just like getting on with it. So Eric handled it in a certain way. He was resolved and accepted it, and Ginger was deeply upset by it. And there you go, like this kind of narrative, this mythology that they hated each other. Ginger, he lost his friend.
They were like brothers, really.
Yeah. I mean, brothers can argue and fall out and all of that stuff, but they're brothers. And I think that there was that genuine feeling. And, the subsequent to that, when me, Pete Brown, and you, we did a tribute at Shepherd's Bush Empire.
Yeah, that was
to my dad. That was 2016, and Ginger came down, and Ginger had just had a heart operation. He was very unwell, and he played with Abbas Dodu, his percussionist friend, for like 4 minutes. I think they played. But before that, he came on the stage, and he told this story about my dad, and it was so loving. It was unbelievable. It was like the most special part of the evening, really.
Yeah,
and we had everybody. We had Lulu, we had Mick Taylor, we had, all my dad's collaborators, all the people that he'd worked with, as much as possible.
It was an amazing night.
Yeah, I mean, it was super loose, but like the love was there, and it was about sharing that. Sharing that celebration of him with his friends, like his musician friends, and everybody there, bar maybe 2 people, had all worked with him.
Yeah, Dennis, for instance, Dennis Chambers. And we had him on the podcast recently, and I was talking to Dennis on the way from the hotel, and he said, "Oh yeah, I should play you this." And it's a record that he did with Andy Summers. So yes. Andy Summers, your dad, and Dennis. And he played me 2 demos. So there is actually, he said we did a whole record.
Well,
so he said Andy Summers has the files, has the tapes.
Yeah.
So there is a whole album he's done with Andy Summers.
Well, that was the time I mentioned before, like when we were talking about them comparing notes about who hated each other most in the respective bands. But yes, I spent a week. This was around the year 2000 again. We spent a week in Santa Monica. Me and my dad stayed in a hotel, but just down the road from where Andy lives. And that was right around. And they'd started making a record with a different drummer, and it wasn't working. And then they brought Dennis in, and they made this record. And then they shopped it, and they weren't really getting the interest that they felt they deserved. And they all just moved on to their different projects or whatever.
Right.
So yes, it's in Andy's vault, as it were. I've got Andy's email somewhere, so maybe I could send it.
Convince him to.
Hey, dear Andy, please send Rob Cass the tapes, care of Abbey Road.
And we mix it there.
Andy's Andy, a lot of people might not know that about him, but he was in Zoot Money's band in the 60s. So when Chaz Chandler brought Jimi Hendrix over from New York for the first time, they got off the plane at Heathrow, and the first house they stopped off was Zoot Money's house. Wow. And Andy was living in the room upstairs. And so Andy was one of the first people that Jimmy met in London, in the UK. So Andy was sort of pretending to be a pop star in the mid to late 70s, but he'd actually already had a career in the 60s, and he's still at it. He's still working, out there doing stuff, and he's amazing, really interesting guy.
Here's, you probably know this, you know all these stories, but your dad obviously told me as well that he was going to form a band with Hendrix at one point.
There was talk of it.
There was talk of it, and then Hendrix died, sadly. But they were seriously talking in discussions about forming a band.
Well, I think Jimmy also was exploring a lot of different things those last few months of his life. He wasn't happy.
Because he was a huge Cream fan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the very famous story, when Cream split up, there was Lulu, the lovely Lou. She had her, again, she's amazing. And she had her own TV show. She was a teenager, 16, 17 years old in the 60s. She had her own TV show. So the Jimi Hendrix Experience were performing on the Lulu show. And off script, in the middle of one of their songs, Jimmy goes, "Hey," and they stop playing. He goes, "Hey, we'd like to dedicate this next one to Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, and Jack Bruce." And they launch into "Sunshine of Your Love." And apparently, the producers of the show, that guy's never coming on the show ever again, because he kind of did what he wasn't meant to do that, So, but yeah, they all hung out. I'm seem to remember my dad showing me he's got a scarf or shirt that Jimmy had given him, or something. It was one of his things in his drawer, in his bedroom. So there you go. But yeah, they all knew each other, and there are some recordings maybe from Electric Ladyland, just jam sessions and stuff.
Amazing.
Yeah,
it'd be great to get your hands on those. So you've written an opera.
Well, I'm in the middle of writing an opera. Yeah.
And how's it what's the theme? What's it?
Well, I'm actually writing 3.
3 operas.
So,
don't make it easy on yourself.
Yeah, don't make it easy, yeah. So I've written one. It's interesting because I found this incredible story from 860 BC. It's an ancient Chinese semi-mythological historical story about the late Western Zoo period. And it's kind of like a precursor to The Boy Cries Wolf. It's about this concubine that comes to the court, and the king imprisons his wife and banishes his son and marries this concubine because she's kind of this otherworldly beauty. They end up having a kid, but she's never satisfied. So he keeps trying to do things for her, and she just sits there going, I'm not, whatever. And then he figures out, like on the wall, the Great Wall of China, call it, and there's these warning beacons for if the castle is going to be attacked, right. Then they would light the beacons, the fire, and the army would come to defend the castle. So he goes, light the beacons when there's no threat. And so the whole army turns up, and she starts laughing. She's like, that's good, And so he just keeps doing it, and over time, I've kind of, because it's a mythological story, we don't know what the truth is, so I'm kind of allowed to make it up to some degree. So he just, like, literally over a year, he just kind of keeps doing this, and the army keeps going and then going back and going, and eventually they lose faith with him, and then they overthrow him and install the first son that's the basic story. But I mean, the ancient Chinese culture is incredible. I mean, there's so much there. And it's not about me stealing another culture, because I'm writing it in my own style. But it's just interesting because we're living in this woke time. So it's a struggle. Like, oh, you're not Chinese. You can't write a Chinese story. You're not Chinese. So I've got a bit of feedback. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, we're humans. We should be able to write anything.
I'm going to nail my colours to the mast on this one. I just think it's nonsense. Yeah. Musical appropriation is rubbish. I mean, we're all influenced by everything, and that's the beauty of music. This whole thing, you can't do this because it's like, if someone does some Irish music in their music, you're not Irish, what's all that about? I'll be talking rubbish. All the great musics of the world come from people being influenced by country music and black music, African music.
Well, what's that girl, the biggest star in the world? She's doing Vegas, and a British singer. Anyway, I can't remember, but she's
Adele,
yeah. So she got into trouble because she put cornrows, she put little mini nappy dreads in her hair, because it was Notting Hill Carnival, right? And everyone, you're stealing Jamaican culture. It's like, dude, I grew up in London. Everyone's doing that, It's like, you can't.
We're Londoners.
Everyone has to let go of all that stuff. It's so secondary to, I always go back to what Martin Luther King said, and I really respect what he said. It's like, I don't want my children to be judged by the color of their skin. I want them to be judged by their character.
And their merit.
Yeah, exactly. What are you bringing? Who cares about all that stuff? It's not important.
Just getting back onto Sons of Cream. So you're touring next year, back on the road again?
Yeah, we've got around 30 dates in the US starting in February. Then if we might take a break for a couple of weeks and make this record that we're talking about doing in the beginning of April, and then we'll do a couple of weeks in the UK.
Right.
Then we're going to come across to Europe in May. I believe we're going to be playing dopeYEAH in the middle of May as well.
Fantastic.
So yeah, we're looking forward to that. So yeah, probably 40 or 50 shows the first half of next year, then take a break, maybe do these other things like my opera, and I'm making a solo record as well. So
you're going to be busy for the rest of the year. Well, 2025 is going to be a big year.
I was thinking of calling the record 2025.
Well, I have to say it's been amazing talking to you, obviously, about your life, and great talking about Jack, your dad, and we both miss him terribly. I think of him every day. We love you, Jack. If you're up there listening to us, and we miss
absolutely.
you. But he
would have loved this place.
Yeah, he would have loved it. He was a hugely important part of my life, and I think the thing he believed in me. I think that's the thing. If he loved you and he believed in you, he just gave you everything. He just had a huge impact on me in my life, and I'm forever grateful for that. And then meeting you and meeting Pete Brown, and again, all these spurs, all these things, relationships that happened directly because of meeting your dad,
Yeah, and I think he was very insightful, certainly with creativity. He could see, this guy Rob really is bringing his whole self to things, and you do, you can tell when there's a sincerity about what people do, an authenticity. There's a lot of chances in this world, and we have to wade through that. And I think my dad understood that. He didn't suffer fools, as we say,
Well, he was a Scot,
Yeah, I mean, he's a survivor.
Scot.
Like your background too. Like you have to learn to be tough and survive. Even if you're a sensitive guy, you have to still be tough.
Yeah, I think we come from similar backgrounds. That's maybe was something that drew us together. It was like he was a tough Scott, maybe I'm seen as a tough Irishman and coming from a working class Irish background, and you have to fight your way through. But at the end of the day, you know, you have to bring something to the party, you know, and also be present and passionate and in love with the project. And you know, for me, you know, meeting your dad, like I remember when I got the call eventually to say I was doing the job as producing the album, I actually threw my phone away. It was like, I couldn't cope with it. It was, oh my God, he's one of my heroes. You know, I literally got on I threw it onto the couch.
But I mean, you know, you should take it as a real compliment because well, you know this, he kind of self-produced a lot of his records because he never trusted, and I understand that feeling. Like you're giving up a lot when you work with a producer. You have to trust that person. You have to trust that person they're going to do the right thing. And it's not something you can write in a bullet point, you know, notes. You're feeling it in each moment, you know. Yeah. And so you have to place a lot of trust in a producer when you're an artist, if you're a true artist, because it's not just about a song and then whatever. You just do the arrangement, I don't care. When you're a true artist, you're thinking of every aspect of the music. Yeah. And so a producer, you have to have that trust in someone that they're going to respect the organism, the whole thing, you know, not just one aspect of it. And so, you know, that's good. That you know, he obviously loved you. You know.
Thank you, and I loved him too. And I'm so glad we've become pals as well, and looking out for each other. And I think this is that old school thing where, you know, a lot of that old school, we looked out for each other. Even when we had Mike Stern here recently, and it was a great time, and he's Dennis Chambers. Guy, But they, even through all their trials and tribulations, they still kind of looked out for each other. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there's not so much of that these days. I don't want again sound like some old fart, but it just doesn't seem to be that camaraderie and that deep friendship and understanding about we need each other. We can't do it alone. You know, it's too hard, you know?
I just think it became, maybe it was always a little bit like the mafia, the music business. Is certainly, obviously, in, you know, money-wise, there was a lot of dodgy things going on in all business, you know. It's at the root of these things. It's not all pure. But the music business is full of that stuff. And so the actual music somehow is a sacred thing. And, you know, we have to protect that. We do have to, I hope, come more and more back to that simple understanding that this is about the celebration of community, the sharing. You know, pretty much all music could be traced back to dancing. You know, certainly with the popular genre, it's about community, being together, sharing things, you know. I mean, there's also, you know, complex music that's a bit more like, you know, you have to grow a goatee and kind of look like, as you're watching it, do that, you know. But I mean, or whatever, you know, I mean, I love both kinds of music, all kinds of music. But yeah, when it comes down to it, it's sharing, you know. And I think truly great artists, they always retain a sense of humility, you know, because in order to grow, you can't think that you know something, because then you won't bother exploring something that you might not yet know, you know. Oh, I know it all. Don't talk to me. I know everything. You know, that's not going to get you anywhere. So like humility is an incredibly powerful trait. Confidence and humility together is interesting because like confidence can veer into arrogance. But if it doesn't, if it's just confident, I know that I've got something to bring to the table, but I'm also really humble. I'm able to be just a normal person as well, you know. And I think, but also maybe like coming through serious drug addiction can also be a very humbling experience too. You know, so someone like Mikey Stern, he might go, actually, I survived, you know, the craziness. And my dad too, he survived up to a point. I mean, obviously his health issues were directly related to his drug use, but that's life, you know. You can't undo it.
That's a great way to finish it, man. Malcolm, Bruce, thank you so much, man.
Thank you for having me, man.
I think we should go to the pub now, really.
Oh, now it doesn't sound so good.
Yeah, it was
Ah! Orange strings are hard to play. Anyway, something like that.
Fantastic. That's
Oh, the earlier stuff was better. Okay.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you, thank you. I'll come back and do it when I've practiced.
That's great.